Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Cassie Elle Talks. This episode is really exciting for me because I am doing my first video about a prototype game. The game will be hitting Kickstarter next month on February 15, and it is called House of Borgia by Talon Studios and Gamelyn Games. The story behind House of Borgia is you are a cardinal and the Pope has just died, and you want to take the Pope's position, but you're kind of shady and everybody knows it, so no one's going to vote for you. So you decide what you're going to do is find one of the cardinals that you can pull the strings behind and get him elected, and then you're going to be able to be the Pope using this new cardinal that you've had elected as the Pope. So the game plays 2 to 6 players, and all players are a cardinal that is trying to get their cardinal elected. All of the roles are assigned randomly, and the game has a lot of dice rolling, bluffing, guessing, and it's really cool. I've actually not played a game that has this kind of dice rolling mechanic, and I'll explain it to you when we get to the video. So without further ado, here is the prototype version of House of Borgia by Talon Studios and Gamelyn Games. All right, everybody, here's our setup for House of Borgia. And like I said in the intro of this video, House of Borgia is a story where you are a cardinal and you are puppeting another cardinal, trying to get them to have the most influence by the end of the game so they can be elected Pope. At the beginning of the game, the cardinals are all laid out here on the table, and they all have these little cubes on them that represent their influence, and all of them start with 2 influence at the beginning of the game. And we have a setup for our 1, 2, and our 3 players, or let's just 1, 2, 3. And each of these players was given a screen, and the screens are helpful to hide your dice rolls. So everyone was also given a bunch of these dice. For 3 players, they get 5 dice. All of our players at the beginning of the game are going to get distributed one of these cards here randomly, and these cards represent all of these cardinal cards out here, so you know which card is going to be your puppet. We have 6 cards total: the Inquisitor, Theologian, Temporal, Idealist, Fundamentalist, and Simonist, and forgive me if I butchered any of that, but this is 6 cards here for 6 players, and we don't need all 6 of them, so let's go ahead, we'll deal them out, and then we'll discard the remaining 3. So now that everybody has their secret puppets assigned to them, and everybody has their dice, all players roll their dice at the same time. The player who rolls this symbol, the fate symbol, the most amount of times is going to be the start player of the game. And let's say we're the start player of the game, and we're over here, number 1. So now that we have our start player determined, we can go ahead and begin our game of House of Borgia. House of Borgia is played in a number of phases, and the first phase is called bidding and action. All players roll their dice, and the start player makes a guess at the number of symbols that were rolled. The player only picks 1 symbol, and then they guess how many of all of the dice that were rolled show that symbol face up, including this face, which is a wild face. When a first player chooses one of the faces that they are going to make a bid on, they are essentially choosing an action to take. By saying that they're going to bid, let's say 3 of these rumor dice were rolled, then what they're saying is, I want to take the rumor action, and I believe at least 3 of the dice were rolled, and if I'm correct, I get to take my action. The only way that you can find out if the first player is correct or not is by the next player to their left choosing to call their bluff. And the way a player calls their bluff is they believe that there are not, in fact, at least 3 of these dice rolled, and all of the players reveal all of their dice, and we determine who is telling the truth and who is not. If the player to the start player's left does not want to accuse them or call their bluff, as the game explains, then the start player gets to take their action. The second part of the bidding and action phase is taking that action, and these are the different kinds of actions that you can do. While I'm explaining the actions, I'm also going to explain how they're going to be helpful in the game. That way you can kind of understand how the game works, and then I'm going to come back to all of the actions once I've explained how they work. The first action a player can bid on is this action. This action is called the bribe. It's kind of hard to tell with my camera, but it's 2 little coins there. And if a player bids on a bribe and they are successful at their bid, what they get to do is move one of these cardinal mats to the top or to the bottom. And the reason that's important is once a player has been accused of bluffing, something happens here with these cardinals where they are gaining influence. They start from the top here where the cubes are and get 3, 2, and 1. And so if your cardinal that you're trying to puppet is at the top of the ladder, when a bluffing accusation happens, then your cardinal is going to get the most influence at that point. So when you choose to do a bribe action, you are aiding your cardinal in getting more influence. The next action a player may bid on is the poison action. The poison action takes 2 of these influence cubes from a cardinal and puts it back into the bank. You can take 2 from 1 or 1 and 1 from 2 to put back in. The next action you can bid on is called Judgment, and Judgment allows you to take 2 from 1 and move them to the other, or take 1 and 1 and move them to another 1 and 1. And that will allow you to spread influence amongst the cardinals if you like to, and it can also help you remove influence from a cardinal that you see is getting pretty high influence. The next action the player may bid on is this action called the Anti-Pope. That's when this cool little prototype piece comes in. And if this is the action chosen by the player and they are not accused of bluffing, they get to take this and place it on a cardinal. That cardinal that round cannot gain or lose influence. So it could also be beneficial for you if your cardinal has a lot of influence on him and you don't want him to be able to lose any. The last action a player may bid on is this one called the rumor action. The rumor action is a guess, kind of who you think is puppeting what cardinal. So if a player chooses the rumor action and they are not accused of bluffing, they can take one of these back cards here and assign them to another player. Let's say we have a funny suspicion that second player here is the temporal, so we can take this rumor card, place it in front of them, and then at the end of the game, if they were indeed the temporal is out of the game. So this can be a pretty cutthroat game if you use this card, but there are other variants that you can throw into the game where it's not so cutthroat. And don't forget, this last symbol here is the fate symbol, and the fate symbol is used as wilds when it comes down to guessing how many of what die were rolled during that bidding phase. So now that we have seen all of the actions that we can take, let's go ahead and recap on this phase. Everybody has rolled their dice, and our start player, which is us over here, has chosen to make a bid. We have guessed, also known as picked our action that we want to take, and we have chosen to guess for the judgment action. We are making a bid that there are at least 2 judgment dice face up on the table. If our second player wants to accuse us of bluffing about these 2 judgment die, they can do so, and then everybody would reveal their dice and see if we were indeed correct in our guess or not. But let's say they choose not to. We get to take our action, and we move 2 tokens from one cardinal to the other. Now that we have done our action, the next player gets to make a guess. We don't re-roll our dice, we keep our dice the same way that they were face up, and the next player makes a guess on any action they choose, but they have to guess at least 1 more die than we guessed, regardless of what action they choose. So if we guess that there were at least 3 judgment dice, then the next player has to guess at least 4 of whatever action they choose. Now let's say we get to a point where it's come back to us and we are going to guess something really high, like let's say there are 8 of these rumor actions. The second player decides, you know what, I don't think that there are 8, and they decide to call our bluff. Let's see how that works. Now that all of our players have revealed their dice, now that we are in the second phase, the calling a bluff phase, we see that we were wrong. Our bluff was called and there are only 6 rumor dice face up, and what happens is we lose one of our dice because we were called on a bluff and we were wrong. Now if we had been called on a bluff and we were right, the player that accused us of that bluff would then have to lose a die of their own. Losing a die is important because the game ends once one player has lost all of their dice. So if your cardinal is way up in the lead, you can make some kind of crazy wild accusation like, I'm guessing that there are 100 rumors out there. And then someone's obviously gonna call your bluff, and then if you have to lose your last die and your cardinal's in the lead, you might be able to force everybody into letting you win the game. But that's where those rumor cards come in. If someone had successfully guessed your rumor, then your cardinal's out of the game anyway. But that's at the end of the game. So getting back to what we're doing right now, we've lost this die, it's out of the game, and the next phase occurs. Now that we've resolved the bluff accusation, we move into the last phase, which is called rallying influence. And that's kind of what I was telling you about before, where you moving the cardinals around with that bribe action will help you get more influence, and it occurs in this action. The top cardinal here gets 3 cubes. The next cardinal gets 2. And the last one gains 1. Now at this point, if any of our players had lost their final die during that bluffing phase, this is when the game would end, after all of the influence had been distributed and we were at someone with 0 dice. They're kind of hard to see in the camera, but we have black cubes here as well, and the black cubes represent 5 of the white ones in case you run out of white ones. So let's go ahead and swap those out. Once the game ends, all players would reveal who their cardinal is that they were puppeting, and we would see if anybody had matched that rumor card correctly. If they did, that cardinal would be out of the game, unless you were going to play with some of the other variants in the game where it says, instead of them being out of the game, whatever dice they have left over count as -2 influence to that cardinal. In addition to that, at the end of the game, for every remaining die that a player has, they gain 2 additional influence to their cardinal. So if you end the game quickly and you ran out of dice, you might not end up winning the game because your opponents have so much dice that they can add so much influence to their cardinal, and then he just passes you over. There's another variation you can do with that rumor eliminating the player. Instead of it taking a cardinal out of the game, you can have them lose as many influence as there are players. And that's House of Borgia. It's a very cool dice rolling, trick taking, bluffing kind of game, and I like that you play the game simultaneously with other players, so there's not a lot of that sitting down time. And I also like the whole bluffing mechanic where you can't let someone just make outrageous claims, and you also can stop people from getting to do actions that you don't want them to do. So keep an eye out for House of Borgia hitting Kickstarter on February 15. So that was House of Borgia by Gamelyn Games and Talon Studios. I really enjoyed the game, and I'm really excited for it to hit Kickstarters. The game will be hitting Kickstarter next month on February 15, so if you really enjoyed checking out this game on this video, definitely keep an eye out for the Kickstarter coming up next month. If you want to find out some more information about the game before it hits Kickstarters, I have some links below. One is to their Board Game Geek page for House of Borgia, and then the other one is to their website where you can find out some more information. If you like this video and you want to see some more of my videos, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and my website, CassieElle.com. And if you want to see some more out of Talon Studios and Gamelyn Games, I have their Twitter information down below as well. So that was Cassie Elle signing out with House of Borgia by Gamelyn Games and Talon Studios.